Hi, I hope everyone can see me. Welcome to our month of Black History programming with myself, Chantal, and Northern Pride. So this is one of our first panels, and we're joined tonight to explore what life is like for those that identify both as LGBTQ and a person of colour. So you're joined by me, Chantal. We also have Patrick, Dami, we have Farhan, and we also have Daniel. So I want to give a little bit of a wave. I hope I didn't forget anyone.
Hi.
Okay, so Patrick, we'll go to you first. If you could just introduce yourself and what you do, and just give a little bit of a backstory about your maybe you coming out and when you first realized that you were queer. Just give us a quick rundown.
Yeah. Hi everyone. My name is Patrick Ziza, but I kind of shorten it, go with Ziza. But today you're gonna have my full surname. So my name is Patrick Ziza. I was born in Rwanda, and I moved here almost 20 years ago. I'm a performing artist. So by that, I mean, I create dance, I choreograph, and I perform, and I do a little bit of acting as well. I'm interested in my African heritage. I'm kind of big on my African heritage and what it means to me. I'm also interested in actually the environment I live in, which is the Western environment. So I love the idea of just fusing those two different aspects of my life together and actually just create something that is both from my heritage and also the environment I live in. When did I come out? I think I was I was always been myself anyway, so I've always been myself. I don't think I've officially come out because I've always been me. And people know about me, and people kind of guessed from earlier on when I was a teenager. So I don't really I was never sat people down and telling them, oh, listen, I'm coming out, I'm gay. So I am very proud of being gay and queer. But at the same time, it's just never something that I thought that I was, gonna sit people down and tell them, listen, I'm gay, get used to it. So, so my coming out story is pretty much never happened. I just happened to be me, and people loved me, and people who didn't really accept me, I just don't have time for them. What else can I say about me? I love colors, as you can see. I love colors. I feel like colors just give me life, and there's so many ways I do express myself and my art through colors, and also through my work. So I'm big on colors, and the brighter the better. Yeah, so that's me.
Thank you, Patrick. Yes, we can see you are very you. We love you for it. If we go next with Dami.
Hi, I'm Dami. I'm 21 years old and I'm from London/Essex. I'm queer, non-binary, and I study at Newcastle University. So I think I first realized when I was probably like in my beginning of my teenage years, but because, I didn't exactly have a name for it, I just knew exactly how I felt in my heart. And that's, for me, was just knowing that in terms of being queer, it was just, I felt connected to people, and just being like, if I vibed with a person, then that was enough for me. And I think as I got older and I was able to go to more spaces, like the very first time I went to London Pride with my friends from school, and it was just like one of the best days of my life. And I was just like, I love this so much. And then the following summer, I made friends with someone online, and we went to Black Pride, which happens in London as well. We've just gone like every year, person. Yeah, it's like just the best thing ever. Like the food, the music, and you just feel so at home being around other Black queer people. And it was just, for me, as I got older, it was more not necessarily having to just put a label on it, but just being more like, however you feel is valid, and whoever you want to love is completely valid as well. And now I think the biggest thing for me is just wanting to connect myself with art. So I'm a photographer, and it's just wanting to create representation for Black kids, for Black LGBT plus kids, and just being like, you deserve to see yourself in the media, you deserve to see yourself at home, and just making people feel safe as well, because that's the biggest thing, being able to have accessibility to certain spaces and feeling safe wherever you are. Because when I was in school, it was like sex education wasn't representative, it wasn't inclusive, and I've kind of had to learn a lot for myself, even away from like sex education, just relationships and life and stuff like that. So I feel like going forward, using art can be a fantastic medium to make people feel more included. But yeah, that's me. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Dami. We'll go to Farhan next.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. That's Arabic for peace be upon you. I am a queer Muslim, and Muslims, that's how we greet each other, because we wish to sort of wish peace upon each other. So my journey has been about reconciling the fact that being a Muslim, being raised as a Muslim, and being South Asian, and being queer and being gay, how can I kind of like marry this into like a really, really, really tasty little stew, and make it something that I can actually kind of live my life by, because I don't feel like I should have to sacrifice any kind of like aspect of my identity due to the fact that people perceive Islam and LGBTQ as being separate things. People perceive being brown and being LGBTQ as different things. I'm trying to like push for things to be much closer together. I'm a huge Black ally, so I'm an ally to all of my Black siblings, and I identify as queer and non-binary. I am South Asian. I'm getting deathly, but I'm not very kind of very good at being a part of the culture. I'm a bit Western, I'm one of those coconuts, they call it, brown and brown on the outside, white on the inside. But I recently took part in a film called Pride and Protest, which starts off basically at the Birmingham protest, where basically lots of Muslim community from Birmingham were protesting against LGBTQ relationship education, which is now passed through the House of Lords and is kind of like ratified into law now. So and Ofsted will downgrade schools that don't teach some element of LGBTQ in relationships education. So I decided that because there were so many Muslims protesting against this kind of legislation, I would just go to these protests and say, well, what's so wrong with them? In fact, I could have really used these lessons when I was at school, because when I was 15, and I knew I was LGBTQ, I knew I was gay, I actually got bullied for it, and I don't understand why I should have had to have dealt with that, and I don't want anyone that is in that situation now to have to deal with that either. So I was basically going to these protests and telling them that actually, they should allow this to take place. And I met a film crew called Rainbow Films, and you can get their you can find them if you search for at LGBT Rainbow Film on Twitter or Instagram, and you can find out more about the film. I'm also, like Steve mentioned, you can catch the film still on Squiff, which is the Scottish Queer International Film Festival. I just happen to be Glaswegian as well, but there's no actual real connection between the two. It's going around lots of film festivals like the BFI Flare. It was a pick of the Flare. And it's going to be going to COSAF, lots of other film festivals around the world. I'm also in another program which you can catch on Channel 4, all four, if you first search for My God, I'm Queer. So that's currently being shown on Channel 4, as Steve has pointed out, and that's focused more on Muslims. And just another thing about Pride and Protest, it starts off with the kind of protests in Birmingham, but it moves on to celebrating more of the Black and South Asian, Black, brown people that are LGBTQ, the activists in the UK, what they're up to, and it culminates in this beautiful display at UK Black Pride, where we get on stage, we dance, we interview everyone, including Lady Phil, and it's a really great film. You've got to watch it.
Thank you very much, Farhan. And last but not least, we have Daniel with his lovely headset. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, everyone. I've just had to change location very quickly. The pitfalls of working from home. My name's Daniel. I am 36. I work in the television broadcast industry. I've done so since I was 19 years old. Currently working in production finance, and I've worked in many different roles, a lot of them being office related. So in terms of me, who I am, I'm from Leeds. I am the second generation of British Caribbean parents. My grandparents are from Jamaica and from Barbados, respectively. And in terms of my coming out story, I was roughly 16 years old when I officially came out to lots of my friends and family. But like other people mentioned, I didn't really officially come out to my family. It was always kind of organically just gauged that I was a gay individual, and I always had lots of female friends. I think I was always slightly more effeminate growing up. So I think when I did actually have those conversations with people, they were maybe not as surprised as I was as to the fact that I was probably a little bit more flamboyant than I actually thought. But when I did come out, it wasn't necessarily like a big grand gesture. It was more a case of I've just had individual conversations with people who specifically asked, as opposed to volunteering the information. And then in terms of my dating life, I've always been quite a reserved person. So I've never really been the sort of person to, let's say, broadcast that information to other people, but only because I didn't have a particularly fantastic coming out story. And coming from a Christian household, I had a lot of backlash from my mother in particularly, also from my stepfather at the time, who was from Kingston, Jamaica, and he was not very, he was very vocal against the whole situation. But interestingly, over the years, I've found that I've had a lot of changed perceptions, and I think that's come through the way that people see that I conduct myself and how I engage with other people. Because I think for me, it's always been about trying to change perceptions of what the Black community perceives homosexuality to be, because I think there are lots of stigmas, and I think that people, you know, are definitely changing their views, especially as we become more integrated with Western society. But in terms of my involvement, I've never really been a very big advocate for, let's say, major events such as Pride and whatnot. I've been to them, but I often consider myself to be maybe a little bit more restrictive when it comes to that. And I think that that partly comes through having a religious background, which can influence behaviour. But equally, I've had my time on the scene. From the age of 17, I went out with friends. I danced, I partied, I did lots of different things that you do as a teenager, growing up and learning about yourself and, you know, how to conduct yourself with other people. So my experience has been quite varied. And I think that being a Black gay man in the UK is a very interesting paradigm, because you've got so many different people who've got so many different thoughts and perceptions. And what's interesting is seeing how the whole situation has become more relaxed over the years, and just being a part of that and remembering times when you couldn't even go to a shop and buy a particular magazine because, let's say, Gay Times, which is one of many publications, was considered pornographic at one point. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey, but I'm really excited to be part of the panel with very interesting people and hearing different perspectives on the shared experiences. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you very much, everyone. I guess I should talk about myself just for a second. So yeah, I like Patrick and probably Daniel as well, and anyone else who didn't just really come out. You know, I just was always kind of queer, I guess, even from a kid. I remember specifically from sort of being a teenager and watching. There was a film which I've never been able to find, and it was about some young people who were queer. And I just remember thinking, oh yeah, you know, I like girls, but I'm also I would class myself as bisexual. I've dated men most of my life up until last year. I've kissed girls. I've always been aware that I like girls. I've been going to gay clubs since I was about 14. I've always been attracted to women and men equally. But I think as I've got older, I have a girlfriend now, and I've just realised that I'm probably a lot more gay than I am bisexual, and I probably will never ever date a man again. If I ever became single, I probably would never ever date a man again. But I've just always been like myself, and if anyone ever asked, I would always say that I was bisexual, and I've never had to sort of really come out to anyone. Even when last year, when I said to my mum I'm dating a woman, she was just like, whatever. Took my girlfriend home recently, and my family didn't even bat an eyelid. I think everyone just assumed that I was at least bisexual. But my one main memory of so I've got an 11-year-old, and years ago I was down south at my mum's house, and my mum said in front of my ex-partner, oh, I always just assumed that Chantal would bring a woman home. So I think most people probably knew that I was probably more queer than I realized much before. But I'm in a world where I'm in a quite creative world, so it's never really been an issue. And I think even being like a Black female, I've never really had like any issues. I think whereas some people probably have had a lot more issues in terms of like bullying, or I've always just been kind of like quite bolshy and probably quite hard to approach. So I don't think I've probably had as many problems as some other people. But also I think it's sort of, it's the intersectionality that goes along with it, and that's kind of what I want to ask everyone now. I want to ask everyone about the intersectionality of being queer and also being of color. Which one do you find maybe more difficult, or do you find that you're maybe bullied more for your skin color, or is it to do with your sexuality, or have you ever had any comments about your sexuality? And I suppose some of us are probably more noticeably more queer than others. So I guess my question is, in terms of how you identify, which one has been more of an issue? Has it been more of your color? Has it been more of your sexuality, or is it a combination of both? And I'll ask that to Dami first, if that's okay.
I would say it's like it kind of depends on the environment, but it can both be quite conflicting in the sense where it's like if you're in a Black space, it's like you're to this and you're focusing on this, and this being your sexuality is seen as all that you are, but it's like it's a part of me and more. It's like, I like to binge watch on Netflix, or I like to go out with my camera and that kind of thing, or like cozy nights in, that kind of thing, and then my sexuality is a part of me. But if I'm in a space where there's LGBT plus focus, it's like my race is a massive part of it, and so you kind of stick out. So when I'm in a space that is like, for example, my university, in the LGBT society, we have a division that's just for people of color who are also LGBT, and that's like an amazing space for me. Like, we have a group chat and everything, and before COVID we could like meet up and things. And funny enough, we never really talked about being POC or BAME even and LGBT. It was just a space where we could just exist as we are, and kind of see each other for what likes and dislikes we had outside of both of those identities and how we were seen in society. And I think every now and then we might have a conversation where it's like, oh, this happened in my class and this was racist, or this was homophobic and transphobic, and all these kind of experiences. But it's like, I think even when you have the negative experiences, it kind of pushes me more to be like, I have nothing to be ashamed of, and I would like you to see me as a Black person and as a person who's also queer and proud of both of those things. Like, I don't want you to just try and pick apart the parts of myself that you're willing to accept and ignore everything else, because it's like, this is all a massive part of me. So I think that, that's my perspective on it.
Well, I'm unmuted, so I'll just quickly jump in. I felt as though I kind of left the left the frying pan, entered the fire. Is that the right phrase? I thought that I needed to get away from my kind of Muslim community and my Muslim family in order to find a place where I belonged, in order to find safety, in order to find like a queer space to be whole and to be free. But when I went into that kind of space, I realized that everyone was white and quite racist towards me, and also really Islamophobic. And it was always a case of, well, why would you follow a religion that wants to persecute you, kind of thing, rather than just kind of, it felt as though I had to choose between being Muslim and being LGBTQ. It felt like I had to choose between being brown and being LGBTQ. So I feel really resentful towards the movement, the LGBTQ rights movement, for not taking us into account enough in the past. And I think that we as Black and brown people are owed a space. And if we don't get it, then we're going to take it. And we're going to take it with color, with love, and we're going to take it with like music and brilliance and Black excellence and brown, you know, just, yeah, I just think we're going to take it because we have to. I feel, yeah, quite resentful towards the fact that I had to deal with racism on the LGBTQ scenes in venues in Edinburgh and Glasgow when I was living up in my hometown of Scotland. Well, I'm from Glasgow, but I studied in Edinburgh as well. I had to deal with racism in these venues, and that was unfair. I should never have had to have dealt with that. And even when I moved to London, thinking, do you know what? If I move to London, then hopefully, because there's more brown and black and brown people there, I'll definitely feel much more free and much more accepted. That turned out not to be the case either. And now I've realized that you only ever get accepted if you basically, in a bullshit way, demand acceptance. If you demand to be taken seriously, demand equality, you have to make those spaces. I want to think of myself as being not one first or the other. I'm just me. I'm Farhan, and I don't want to have to minimize any aspect of my identity.
Thank you very much. That's actually a really good point, actually, which you made about going to a space and then you think that you're going to be safe, but actually suffering racism. I think that's something that a lot of people in the LGBTQ plus community don't understand, that for us, it comes with a lot of other nuances, which they will never really understand. And like you said, we sort of have to take up space, but we also have to I sort of identify and explain to people how we feel in that space where they feel safe. And I think that's something that the LGBTQ plus, like you said, does not bring across enough. I think it concentrates a lot on being queer, but actually it doesn't address all the intersectionality that comes along with it, whether it's religion or race, even if you've got a disability, something like that. I think it's something that they haven't brought us along with them, and I definitely agree with that. And I'm going to ask Daniel next as well, just to talk about what we talked about before, but also if you could maybe expand on a little bit on what Farhan said as well.
Yep. So it's interesting to hear that from Farhan's perspective, because I've experienced something similar in relation to, let's say, not say tokenism, but mild tokenism within the gay community when it comes to being a black man in particular, because I think there's a perception that you are going to fit an archetypal role when it comes to, let's say, the bedroom, and even if it comes to your particular preference, when it comes to your role within the bedroom. Because I think one thing that a lot of people don't necessarily realize about gay men, I mean, most gay men who probably will know this, but there are various different subcategories of people who like to do certain things. So let's say, for the sake of keeping it very PC, you've got people who are maybe more masculine, maybe more feminine, and then there are people who are maybe in between, who play both roles. So when you are approached by, let's say, maybe a white person, oftentimes, people will speak to me without even really asking for my name. they'll often just refer to me as more like an avatar, and they'll say, "Oh, do you have a BBC?" which stands for a big black something or other, which doesn't really bother me. But I think the issue is that these are the same profiles of people who, when you read their profiles, might often say that they're looking for relationships, but then when you are kind of the person who's objectified in some way, you can't help but feel slightly diminished. It's almost like they're looking for a relationship with somebody else, but then at the same time they might perceive me as being a short-term fling, and it's very difficult to try and separate the two. So when I was younger, I maybe had more of a craving for that type of attention, because when you've grown up within, let's say, a high school environment where you haven't really been out and you've never really expressed yourself in that particular way because of peer groups, and not wanting to kind of be ostracized for the fact that people have got their opinions about how you conduct yourself and live your life, you live a very sheltered life. I mean, speaking for myself, sorry, I did. And when I became 17 and started going out after leaving high school, that's when things started to open up for me. And I've never really had major problems obtaining attention from people. I'm fairly outgoing. I've always been quite gregarious. But again, there are those examples where you can get that mild tokenism and that objectification. And I find that more prevalent than anything else. And I think the way to negate that and to combat that is to, like Farhan said, you really have to almost assert yourself in a way that's not being overtly dominant as well, because equally what you don't want to do is be perceived as being aggressive, and you also try to educate people at the same time, because I think what it does highlight is that there are people out there that don't really know any better, and I think they see what is popular in the media and the way that black people can be portrayed. And again, that's a very broad, generic view of what is happening within the actual culture itself. So I think conversations like this are very good to highlight those intersectional issues that do exist. And the more we know about them and the more we talk about them, then I think the easier it becomes for people to understand just how to approach and not to, cause any potential offence in the process. But yeah, that's what I would say I've observed from that section. And there are other things as well. I mean, just going back to what I was saying before about the religion, I was raised Christian, and I was raised in a Baptist church, but then I was baptized in a Pentecostal church. And for those of you who don't know, Pentecostal churches are a little bit more traditional and conservative than regular churches. And I, tried to adhere to the rules of that situation by almost trying to change myself to fit into a role, because church wasn't just something I was doing for myself. I was also doing it to potentially appease my family as well, who are all Christian. And I did that roughly for a couple of years before I got to the stage where I realized that the level of potential self-hatred that I was conducting towards myself was really superseding my mental health. So, I took a decision to leave the church, and it was quite sad to go. But I think what I realized is that when you are part of a particular group, whatever that group is, sometimes you can find that you adhere to the politics of the situation as opposed to the fundamental values of what is supposed to be at the forefront of that, which is, love and acceptance. But, it can be quite difficult, because then you leave one set of life to go somewhere else, but then you often find that wherever you go, there will be some issue to overcome. So it's an interesting challenge, but I think it does build a lot of resilience. And I think a lot of people who go through these things do experience heightened levels of social awareness and a lot of introspection as well. And I think that's one of the good things that can come from this type of ostracization, if you want to call it that.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I want to ask Patrick as well the same question, but I wondered, I know you've lived and grown up in a different country to England. So I just wondered if you could sort of talk to us as well about that as well, from being there to being here as well.
Yeah, I mean, before I talk about my being brought up in Africa, I just want to say I do agree with both Farhan and Daniel in terms of being objectified as gay men, as gay black men on the gay scene by mostly white men, and I think it's something that I thank God for these type of platforms that we can actually talk about. Basically, you're exotic. People just want to experiment with you. You basically not a human. You just at some point you feel like, oh my God, is this a regular thing? Is this always gonna be like this? So you end up actually kind of losing hope, and it does really affect your mental health as well. But luckily for me, I kind of, being a dancer and working within within dance industry, I was just lucky because I was literally immersed in that, um, and dance as a community has a lot of queer people, so I was lucky to be around people who just saw me as a human being, and for a long time I kind of then decided to to bring out my true colors. And one thing I do as well is just demand respect and demand that space that I feel like I belong here as much as you belong here. So that's, for me, I've always kind of pushed as hard as to just feel, to feel part of the community as well. So in terms of struggling as a gay man on the gay scene, yes, you do definitely get these comments. People approach you for the wrong reasons, and yeah, sometimes when I was 17, yeah, it felt good. You feel like you feel special, but actually, as you grow older, it's not. You just see that people are actually not interested in you as a person. But then I kind of grew out of that when I joined dance, and being a dance city, being around people who are creatives. So I was lucky in that sense. Also having a partner who's for a long time, for almost 12 years now. So I've always been a person who is free and able to express myself and able to express my art. But growing up in Africa, because I left when I was 17, I have to say I also grew up in a very Christian environment, and I pretty much never actually questioned my sexuality up to that point. But I kind of knew, that I fancied men, but you just wouldn't accept it. You think, oh my God, no, this just, it's not how it is. It's not how it is. So I have to. It's just maybe in my head. But obviously, as you grow older, then it becomes apparent of the fact that I was gay. But sexuality is something we never talk about in my family. It's just me being gay. We just don't talk about it, and I'm quite open about it. My siblings are lovely. I love them. We talk about it as well. But when it comes to my aunties, my parents, from that on, they love me, but they're not interested in knowing about my lifestyle. And that, for me, I do find a hard balance, because I love the family. Being from an African culture, being from an African background, we have this sense of togetherness and families being together. Your cousins coming around, like your aunties, visiting each other. So we have this sense of being together as a family, and I have that. I think it's in me. So I always visit my aunties, for example, and I'm always me, but I know somehow I have to tone it down, because obviously I'm in their space. I don't like it, but I do it because I love them. So it's a hard line with me, but at the same time, I don't hide who I am. So when they ask me questions about my life, I do tell them, and then it just cuts there. So in terms of my, my parents and my aunties, we just never talk about it. But with my siblings, my cousins, they're so cool. They just love me. They love what I do. So yeah.
Thank you, Patrick. I want to ask in terms of, we've all got different heritage and ethnic backgrounds. I just wondered, do you find that whether you've been on the scene or whether you're with friends, do you ever find that you have to explain yourself a bit more that you feel like a white person necessarily might not have to, in terms of, it's almost as if being a person of color, you shouldn't be gay or you shouldn't be queer, or do any of you ever feel like you really have to, it's almost like you're always having to prove yourself as a queer person? I don't know if whoever wants to answer that, go ahead.
I don't mind.
Okay.
I think if I think about, like, I was on Netflix all day today. I was just kind of having like a chill day, and one thing I think I rant about on Twitter a lot is, where is the queer Black representation? And one of my favorite TV shows is Pose. It's like, it's made me cry like 100 times. I love it so much, and I just felt like I connected to it so much, and it was just breathtaking to see, like, kind of seeing yourself on the screen and seeing these people live their lives and be like, okay, I'm Black and I'm queer and I'm all these things, but also feeling like when you see, I guess, white LGBT people presented through the media, you kind of feel like you're not enough, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like, okay, so this is what a lesbian is supposed to look like. This is what a gay man's supposed to look like. This is what a non-binary person is supposed to look like. And I think not when you like define what non-binary means to you, you realize it's your own personal thing. But for things like, for example, if you're androgynous or anything like that, you'd see, for example, a skinny white person who would dress in a certain way. And because I didn't see that it could be any type of way, I kind of be like, oh, well, then that can't be me. I can't put myself there. I don't feel like I'm queer enough or I'm this enough. I don't feel like I meet up to what I guess the white LGBT standards is. And it very much sets the code for like, this is how you have to be so we can recognize you and accept you. But I think when you kind of enter spaces like this, it's very much like, our community is supposed to be so beautiful and expansive, and none of us are supposed to be the same. That's the beauty of it. But I think it's just like a massive shame that kind of narrative is silenced so much. And it's just like, you really almost have, if you have to fight to be seen and be like, hey, we exist, we're like this. And that's why whenever I see new TV shows like Pose or movies or anything where there's a Black LGBT lead and they're all different types of ways, it's just like, it's so important. So then the kids out there as well can be like, oh, so there's not one way to look, I guess, gay and outside of the stereotypes. There's multiple ways of being it. And even if you do fit into that as well, that way, at the end of the day, everyone feels represented. But that feeling of not feeling enough is definitely very powerful. But I think the way to combat it is trying to find your people and finding the spaces that really represent you. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like totally agree there. I think, especially if you watch certain films or TV shows, it's always like the sassy Black gay guy or brown gay guy. Black women, pretty much queer women, aren't represented at all. Yeah, there's like, and if we are, we're probably like really butch, shaved head, angry, but really we don't really seem to exist at all. So to me, I think, with in terms of representing queer, it's often just the sassy Black man.
I completely agree with Dami. I think she's hit on a really, really important point, which is that actually, as people of color, as Black people and people of color, we are not allowed complexity in our characters when we're appearing on screen. We are not given the same complexity that white people get on screen in LGBTQ movies. Like, you're right, we're either these stereotypes. Where's the the Black really sassy villain like Ursula? Where's she? Where's like the kind of like the Asian queer person that isn't downtrodden by his or their family, but actually, do you know what, leads this really cool queer football club or something? why can't we as people of color expect to have characters that are as complex as the lives that every other white LGBT person leads? You know,
Exactly.
I really want to see that more in when I'm doing my Netflix and chill sessions like Dami was doing today. You know, and Pose, I think, is a wonderful example, because here we had really beautiful women that were just happened to be transgender, but they were really, I mean, like when the series kind of like went along, you could see how much success they were getting. You know, Blanca kind of like founded this beauty store, and it kind of came up with all the resistance that she got from it, but she overcame it. So we need like more feel good stories, but also more villains. We need more complexity.
Yeah, I completely agree as well. You know, I'm just gonna say, you know, for ease, like as a lesbian or a queer woman, like I'm arty. I have tattoos, I have piercings, I have conversations that don't revolve around how sad I am about being gay all the time, or actually my story of like being out is just this is just who I've always been. But it's always like, yeah, you're either the downtrodden person or the really like over the top, like really expressive, like wild-eyed, like gay man or something. There's always just something. It's just we're always just like a polar character. We're never
I mean,
just.
I like the wide-eyed gay thing as well.
Yeah, but you know that's it. But there are so many extensions of that. You know, there are gay men who are quiet and just like to be at home and just sit and watch TV, or they just want to like, you know, they might knit or something. You know, it's just always like they're out on the scene having loads of sex and partying, and you know, and there's always something really bad happens to them, and yeah, and you know, they're on the streets, and it's like that's not who we are. So I think Daniel's got something to say about that as well.
I was only going to say mildly, I can attest to that, because when I first started my current job, we had a Christmas party and then we ended up going out. Well, some people went out afterwards, and I think there was a really big emphasis on wanting to go out to the scene in London, because I've never actually been out properly in Soho, which is a bit sacrilegious. But you know, this was going to be a highlight of the night, and I think that they'd done that to cater to me, because obviously they know I'm a gay man. But I think what's really sad about me at this stage of my life is that I am that person who's just happy to stay in, and I actually have quite minimal exposure to this scene at the moment. And the reason why that is the case is because I just overdid it when I was in my late teens and early 20s. And again, I think, you know, if this expectation has come through media because of the perception of what it is to be a gay black man, and like you were saying before, you were talking about some flamboyant characters, and the people I can think of, you know, from the TV show Oz, if you've ever seen that, and also True Blood, we had Lafayette. And I remember when I was very young and had aspirations to become an actor, and one of the things that stops me from really getting into profession was the fact that I didn't feel like there would be that level of complexity for me. And it's not that I have a problem portraying a different role. I think it's almost the idea of becoming like typecast into a particular role that would be quite difficult as well. And I think it really took away from the whole notion of what it would be to actually, you know, to act. Because I think, as you've said, the thing about mainstream media in the majority of cases, maybe in the past, not so much now, is that they were looking for a particular role for black men to play, which was typically a gangster or, you know, a deadbeat dad or something of that nature. And I think that that is definitely changing. But in the time when I was definitely looking into that sort of profession, it definitely was off-putting. So it kind of led me to feel that I'd rather be in control of my own narrative and, you know, be able to just be myself, really. And I think that that's one of the things I gained from, you know, that perception, is that if we are going to maybe have real change and influence, maybe it's best to try and create our own art in whatever way you do that. And I think that's what's quite good about being a content creator or aspiring to be one, because you can essentially control your own narrative and tell your own story. And I think that that's really, really important.
Yeah, I agree. I think visibility is actually very important in our community, because I think as gay black men and women and queer people, we already have like background stories that most, you know, oftentimes they're actually of struggles and trauma. So when we don't have a representation of that, in the media, we tend to just feel lost. So I think for me, for example, what I do with my art is my work is, first of all, I'm a queer person, so my work is always going to be queer, whether I like it or not. But at the same time, I don't intend for my work to just be for the queer community. So when I apply for funding, when I put my work out there, I make sure that it just goes to any platform that wants to have me. So it's very important that we are visible, and we actually push to not just be for the particular group of people. Sometimes you need that depending on your content, but sometimes I think it's good to push for the mass rather than just the queer community or the gay community. So for me, I definitely believe that my work is always going to be for everyone, very inclusive. And I think sometimes it can be provocative. As an example, one of my first performances I did was in Sunderland, and it was 3 Black guys who were dancing in a shopping mall in Sunderland. I mean, the reception was just a mixture of different comments, and just some people really being like, wow, we've never seen anything like this here. And some people just giving you such a look that you just feel like, whoa, I shouldn't be here. But I do believe that we have to keep pushing. And if we keep pushing, that's how we're gonna create a cohesive environment for us to feel comfortable, to feel like we belong as well, as much as white people, especially in the Northeast, where there is literally like, yeah.
2 of us, 3 of us, 4 of us. I know, even like getting this panel together, I was saying to my partner, like, who do I know in the Northeast that is queer and Black? It was like, oh, okay, I don't know. I mean, there could be a few of us, but we're probably like quite quiet about it, I think,
Yeah.
as well. And there was a question that came up actually, which I think is quite relevant, what we're talking about now. Do you think that Pride should be reformed to support inclusion? Basically, do you think that we need like a massive overhaul of queer Pride, I guess? Because, I've been to one Pride ever in Newcastle, and it was just like, a certain way, you had to, it was a sea of people just sort of getting drunk, and like partying, but actually I want a bit more than that. But also in terms of just the whole of being LGBTQ and being a minority, I guess, in the UK, is it something that Pride needs to address and reform and start from the bottom? And I think especially, we've got a lot of things going on with trans inclusion, non-binary inclusion, but where is the inclusion of people of colour? I still feel like we might be sort of being left behind. And do you feel like it needs to be reformed? I guess, Farhan, I'll ask you first.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, definitely. To be honest, I just don't really think that you can bring lots of people together that just happen to be attracted to the same gender. Like, that's the one thing that brings all these people together. Sorry, but that's a non-starter from the very outset for me, I think, because you're basically asking people to put whatever identity they have second in this space, and just be there because you happen to be attracted to the same gender. I'm sorry, but like, that would be great if like you were white, I guess, and your culture was kind of like the same as most other white people. So you can just get drunk and just be gay. Like, but I'm sorry, but for me as a Muslim, I don't really want to be around a space that's massively alcohol dominated. And equally, I remember instances very recently, just last year, being racially abused at Pride. Unfortunately, that happened in Bristol. It happened in Birmingham, and I just don't really want to have to put myself in that kind of space. But when I went to UK Black Pride, I felt uplifted. I felt understood. I felt seen. I felt heard. I felt loved. So frankly, I think the commercialization of Pride is by corporate companies, by the kind of capitalism that we've got going on. It's kind of like that, and the fact that it's just whitewashed just doesn't really make it a very kind of appealing place for me personally to be. I think that we need to kind of like take Pride back to its roots. We need to go back. We need to educate people on what Stonewall riots were about. Those were, those were Black trans women throwing, protesting against police brutality. That's what Pride should be about. What is it now? It's like having to section off streets, be made to pay a ticket to get into queer places that would have been open on other days. So that there's just a racket where all the pubs can make lots of money on the day and get really pissed and sloshed. Pride has lost its what its purpose was supposed to be.
Yeah, it's definitely been whitewashed for sure. And I think to some point, I don't know, especially how Dami feels, but actually, like I said before, a lot of the representation in Pride is very male focused. It's very much, and a certain type of male as well, white male, probably attractive white male, and it is this sort of like drinking culture. I drink, sometimes I don't drink, but being around it is quite intense. And especially when it comes to being a Black woman, you have identifying markers on you already. And if someone wants to start something, they're probably going to start it with the person that has the most identifying markers first before anybody else. So I think that, it's Pride and inclusion, it's not really a safe space for us. And I would imagine that a lot of us feel that same way. I just don't feel safe. But also as well, people that I've spoken to that aren't of colour, even my partner and some of our friends, we don't, as women, we don't feel safe. But also we don't feel included in things that we like to do. We don't just go out. We don't want to watch a DJ playing really crappy music and like talking over it, and we want something else. So I think like you said, Farhan, Pride needs to just go back to its roots and almost like restart. How do you feel about that, Dami?
No, I totally agree with that, because I can't remember why. Oh yeah, no. I don't know if you guys have heard of a person called Tanya Campus. She started an organization called Exist Loudly to help Black queer kids, be able to have like a really, really good experience based in London. And I recently went to one of her sessions a few days ago, and it was just absolutely amazing. It was about writing letters to people in the future about our experiences. And it was just having spaces like that really just reiterate for me where I want to be is where I feel safest. And although London Pride was like my first ever one, and it will be special for that reason, but in terms of where I felt most at home and where I felt safest was definitely Black Pride. And that was just for me walking through those gates and having food that I'm familiar with and music I'm familiar with. And it just kind of not just being just about, for example, the music and the dancing. There's other spaces and other environments as well. And knowing that it's okay if that's not that thing, if that's not for you. Because I think when I started university, I promise you, I'd never stepped foot inside of a gay bar before. I literally went to Powerhouse for the first time. I was like 19 years old, completely wide-eyed. I had like a pride flag around my neck, and I was like, it was just amazing. But for me, it was like, okay, this makes me feel this type of way, but can I be LGBT? Can I be queer and be in a space that's maybe a bit more quieter? Can I still adapt to that? Because I feel like we're known to be very, I guess in the media, we're known to be very loud and flamboyant and stuff like that. And I definitely have that side of me, but it's also knowing that it's okay if you're more quiet and you want something a bit more chilled, I guess. But at the end of the day, it definitely came back to that being, how did you feel at the end of the day? Did you feel safe? Did you feel welcomed? And did you feel like you could 100% be yourself? And I feel like spaces definitely need that reform, because I definitely don't see enough representation. I definitely see more commercialization and just being like, this is for money and not what it's all about. Like if you go back in the day, this is not what it was about. It was about just creating representation and making people feel included. And I think some of the messages definitely got very diluted and just washed away. And I think going forward now, I think the thing that a lot of pride organizations and safe spaces needed to do is just make sure that everyone in the community, because the community isn't just one type of way and it shouldn't look one type of way. There's so many races and communities and cultures and heritages a part of that. and it's our elders that made all of that possible. And it's just making sure that we keep to our roots and to our foundations and make sure everyone feels included, whether you really like the loud in the clubs or you prefer like, I can't remember what I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't been in Newcastle for a good few months. But I think it's called the Spaghetti Theatre. I don't know.
Alphabeti.
Alphabeti. Oh my god, it's not spaghetti.
Alphabeti.
I'm really tired. I don't know where I heard spaghetti. But they
recently exchanged spaghetti or something. I saw they did something.
Yeah, they did. They hosted like a really cool you were able to make zines, and I had the best time. It was so peaceful. But yeah, that's pretty much what I'm just talking about.
Yeah. Anyone else got any thoughts on that?
Listen, I don't think we're gonna have like a Notting Hill type of a pride, anytime soon in Newcastle.
Yeah, but I think it's just more generally, isn't it, as well?
Yeah, I know. I think it's so commercialized. It lost the meaning for me, and it's lack of inclusive and just people are not passionate about it. Like people just drank. When you look back, in the gay liberation, for example, people are passionate about what they were talking about, how they want to make change, and now it's just it's almost like a type of a person, as is like a very thin white male who's just drunk, and so it's very much I don't think it's for me. It's not I don't feel inspired as a gay man and queer to just attain most of these pride, unfortunately, which is sad.
It is. This is the space where you're supposed to celebrate who you are, and we can't celebrate who we are as people of color who are queer. And it should get to the point where we don't even have to celebrate the fact that we are people of color and queer. But at this moment, we are very much again, even smaller minority.
Yeah.
Being a queer person, you're already a small minority, and then you add whether your religion as well on top of that, and I think that's something that's not addressed. If you
then how do we reform it? Do you know what I mean? What ways can we suggest that? Again,
we're already trying to address one problem in the society, racism.
We should try not to use the word reform, because that kind of hands the power over to some other place where who decides what pride is? Yeah. We do.
Yeah, you're right. We decide.
Well, I guess in some senses, though, when I think about what we're talking about here, it almost reminds me a little bit of what happened with the gay scene, in particular in Leeds, where I would say that it initially started off about being one thing, which was a place where gay people specifically could gather, and then there were, let's say, more integrative measures where a lot of heterosexual women would start to come to the scene because they knew that they were unlikely to be approached by men, and they could actually go out and have fun without being harassed. So in a sense, it's almost a little bit like that, because for me, when I think about pride, and the reason why I'm not necessarily geared towards it per se is because of what you guys have said about the commercialism. But then I've also got in the back of my mind, I remember when I was really young hearing about the nail bombing incident in London. I can't remember exactly where it was. I think it may have been in Soho, but there was a bomb that went off in the gay club, and that always stuck out in the back of my mind. And I always thought to myself that the level of hatred that people could feel specifically towards gay people was quite strong. But it also kind of served as a bit of a warning for me to think this is probably the reason why it's not a safe space, because there are people out there who would like to make examples of people specifically just because they have a different orientation. So when it comes to big events, I think I've had a mild aspect of trauma in that capacity, for something I've not experienced, and maybe just been perceiving that there's going to be a sense of danger there. But then also, as other people have said, hearing stories of people who have gone and knowing that this situation is almost akin to a bit of a debaucherous affair where people are kind of just walking around in the streets. And I've heard of people having sex in the streets. And for me, I'm not saying I'm very prudish, and anyone who sees my social media will see that I enjoy taking pictures topless and expressing myself in the ways that I want to. But I think there's a difference between self-expression and overt hedonism that is almost at the expense of your dignity. And I think that when you are kind of displaying yourself in a way that's going to be quite detrimental and almost kind of bring you've got to kind of think about how you're portraying yourself and how people are going to perceive that. And I think that that's something that we've got to be really careful about, because I don't really want to be at this stage of my life associated with a movement that is essentially going to be degrading to my character, because I mean, I can do that enough by myself first and foremost, but secondly, I think it's just trying to kind of think about what we're actually doing this for. Are we actually trying to make a movement to show diversity in the expression of what can be celebrated, or is it just an excuse to get absolutely wasted and lose inhibitions and make an absolute mess and, you know, be contributing to, you know, almost a bit of a depraved aspect of society? Because again, I'm not saying that that's what it all is, but I feel that if I have that perception of it, then I think other people can too. And I think it's about trying to change that. And I think if there is a way to diversify that in a way that it would be quite innovative in a sense, because it wouldn't have been done before, and I think it could add an extra element, an extra flavor that isn't currently there. And as you say, maybe that's what it needs. Maybe it just needs a dose of something that's a little bit more niche, but a bit more focused and a bit more cultured. And I think that could actually add a different take for people who, like myself, might be less inclined to go.
Yeah,
I don't know if I agree with you, Daniel. I just wonder if maybe because the queer, like we as queer people, LGBTQI people, are kind of like stigmatized and made to feel ashamed of the way that we love and the way that we have sex with each other and the way that we kind of enjoy sexual pleasure. And I actually think I've kind of come a long way in my thinking, and I've been to, like, for example, the like a kinky festival called it's in San Francisco. It's called the Folsom Street Parade, where there is like a lot of street nudity, a lot of street sex and street whipping and things like that. And I think that this actually confronts the kind of shame that we as queer people are made to feel about the way that we love and the way that we kind of enjoy sexual pleasure. I personally don't have a problem with overt sexuality being celebrated in these spaces. I actually think that if it's done soberly, that would really be better. I just think that the way that we're expected to inebriate ourselves in the kind of culture that's predominant in the West with alcohol and with drugs, and where you're kind of encouraged to go out of your mind, that I really object to. But confronting stigma towards sexuality, I don't see that as a problem. I don't see any problem with street nudity or anything like that.
I think, though, it's more of a case of, so you know what Daniel's coming across. I think that, you know, my first experience of Pride in Newcastle, I was watching, I don't know, some E-list celeb, whatever, having a sing-song, and there were two women going for it in front of in a crowd, you know, hands down pants or whatever. And that was my experience of Pride as a first time. I think it was the first Newcastle Pride. And I think, you know, my tutor, I had a script tutor, and he said to me, you have to be able to understand the conventions of storytelling before you can break them. And I feel that way with Pride. I think that before we can start to unravel, address all these different stereotypes, we actually have to understand. And I think, you know, we have to understand that there are stigmas and there are taboos, and that if we live up to these stereotypes and taboos, actually we are creating a problem. And I think it's a very fine line between celebrating your sexuality and sex, and, you know, between that and actually just becoming a bit depraved and debauched. And there are spaces where people don't want to see this. You know, if you're going to a festival and you know you're in a space where this is happening, that's fine. But I think, you know, if you're going to be at an event, and I'm not saying this doesn't happen at non-queer events, because, you know, it will happen on very different events as well, but I think, you know, what Daniel means is, and I don't want to speak on his behalf, but actually, you know, as someone who is queer, it doesn't mean that we want to see these things, and it doesn't mean that you have the right to just be in a space and do these things just because you feel like you're safe, when actually others around you have to experience that. And I think that's where we kind of need to check ourselves and understand that there are different cultures, there are different religions, there are children around us, and we have to be careful that just because we want to show our sexuality and show that we are queer and we are here, it doesn't mean that we have the right ourselves to just do that. And yeah, and I wanted to ask as well, probably my last question to ask is, in terms of the queer community, do you feel like the queer community is still very, very racist? And also, do you feel that people assume that because that someone's part of the queer community, they won't be racist, they won't be this, they won't be that? But do you feel like people don't understand that actually we suffer just as much racism within that community that we would suffer in any other community, and we don't necessarily have allies in that community just because we all like to sleep with people of the same gender or date people of the same gender? Patrick, maybe you can answer that if you understand what I mean.
Yeah, of course. I think there is racism in queer communities. That's for sure.
But do you think people don't understand that happens to us? That
they don't. I think they don't.
We're all allies together, but actually,
yeah.
You're on Grindr, no blacks, no Asians, no this, no that.
Yeah, and I think it's absolutely, especially during, you all know Grindr. I mean, just the fact that people can actually vocalize that no blacks, no Asians, all those things, and also and also when people say, oh, I prefer black men because this and this and this and that, because of trying to just put you in a box, and I think as a black people, we're just so tired of keeping explaining that what you're actually saying, is not right, and you shouldn't be saying this to these people because we have emotions. I think it happens often, and I think sometimes people don't even realize that they do it. And in terms of when people say that it's to do with preferences, I always disagree with that, because you can't be face to face with someone. You wouldn't be able to say what you say on these dating apps. So I always feel like if you can't say something in my face, why would you then put it on these social medias and these dating apps? So I feel like white people coming from privileged places and feel like it's a freedom of speech and all that, but actually what it does, it really does affect a certain group of people, people of color, black people and brown people, and you just can't help but feel objectified and just not valued, as a human beings. You just basically dehumanized. So yeah, it goes on, and I think challenging it's becoming very monotonous, and just we are getting sick of it. So what things like that happens, I just get up and go. Pick up my bag and leave. Because I just don't have the time to do this often. I just don't.
And that's it. I think people don't realize that the trauma that it can give us, and also that it's tiring. We're, like I said, we're already fighting racism, but actually within the queer community, we're fighting it just as hard. And I think I found as well that from people that I've spoken to, it seems to happen much more to gay men or bisexual men, and maybe because as women we don't have these kind of like Grindr apps. Well, I'm not aware of them anyway, but it seems to be very overt in those terms, and maybe it's the way that you put yourself out there, maybe because like women maybe don't put themselves out there as much. But yeah, do you find as well, maybe Daniel, do you find that within the gay community there is just as much racism, but people don't really expect it to be there?
It's a funny one, because I think it all depends on the perception of the individual as well. Because for me, I have always been a person who is very open, outgoing, talkative, and it's amazing the levels of attraction of people who do send me messages. So, I often receive messages from a lot of older white men, and that is not anything that is an issue. I think it's just their perception sometimes is quite funny to me, because they'll often say things like, oh, you're really attractive. I imagine you probably get lots of messages. And in actuality, I've spoken to like non-black people, white people specifically, and it's interesting to compare, the level of traction that one person will get versus someone else. They could probably have maybe 5-10 times the amount of messages that I'll receive, and I still get quite a few, but so it's not really competition, but it's just interesting to see where people's preferences lie. Because even if you don't get a response to a message, for example, and you send something out, I think there is a lot of general narcissism in dating apps in general, whether we're talking about specific racial issues or not. I think there's a high degree of selection that people feel is available at their fingertips, and because of that, the need to push forward with a particular group is minimized because, you know, unless you do have that preference per se, then, you know, there are hundreds of other people who you can choose from. And if people statistically are choosing people who look like them, and then, you know, you are kind of out of the dating pool. And I think that, you know, the ability to converse with someone and actually get on a deeper level with them is quite, it's a rare skill, but I think the people who do take the time to actually talk to me, I think they're actually quite surprised, because I think they look at my pictures and they have a perception of me. I'm quite a athletic, you know, muscular person. So by proxy, they might automatically assume I have one particular sexual preference when it might be the opposite. And then when they speak to me, they often say, "Oh, you know, I'm really surprised that you are as eloquent as you are, and, you know, you've got a lot of things to say." And I'm often, you know, not necessarily surprised at why they're saying it, but because I know what they're inferring is that they would anticipate that I would be, you know, maybe quite monosyllabic, not able to articulate myself and really express what I'm thinking and feeling, because I think that, not necessarily just relating to race, but I think that's just the actual culture of the apps in general as well, because it is very, very much about the carnal aspect of, I just want to, you know, hook up with somebody with no real depth and meaning. But yeah, it's a very wide spectrum of different emotions, but I feel that just to kind of be quite fair on this topic as well, I think there's a difference between the tokenization and also just general curiosity, because there's one thing where someone says, I will not talk to a particular sector of people, versus someone who says, I've never really been with a particular sector of people. And I think, like anything, you have to gauge the context of how something's said, because I think you can tell by someone's intentions, you know, whether they mean something to be, you know, just generally quite curious and wanting to know more, versus, you know, objectifying you and putting you in a box. So, you know, you have to be quite discerning, but I think that that is definitely on a case-by-case basis. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, but I think it just depends where you are in the world. And, you know, just as an example, I went to Jamaica. So by proxy, there were a lot more black people. And I had a perception in my head that I was going to probably see a lot more openly, well, not, I wouldn't say openly gay people, because Jamaica is a country that doesn't accept that wholeheartedly. But I had a perception in my mind that I was probably going to find more quote unquote attractive black people, because I think one of the biggest stigmas in the UK is that there are very few openly gay black men who will, you know, openly not parade themselves, but express themselves in such a way that they, you know, will be comfortable, you know, going on dates, or, you know, not being on the DL, the down low. And it surprised me that a lot of those people weren't there, they didn't exist. And the few people that did exist, you know, were just like any other average person, but just far away in a different country. So yeah, it's a really, really confusing, complex situation. But I feel that, just to conclude that statement, what it really made me realize is that if you are wanting to try and attract a particular person or be a particular way, I think you have to first and foremost become that way yourself, and you have to literally be the change you want to see. And you just have to try and educate people one at a time, so that you're not, you know, coming at it from a very frustrated place of, this situation is not working for me, I'm not really getting what I want out of this, and change the narrative to say, well, if that person doesn't want to be with me, then I'm not going to try and force them. And if they can't see the value in me, then eventually someone else will. So just be willing to wait.
I've been amazed because I mean, I probably like dated for a lot of my life in terms of dating apps. And you would get messages like about your skin color once you talk to them. But I've been quite amazed to hear from my gay men friends about the taglines that they'll see, you know, that like, no black people, know this, know that. I'm actually amazed by it. And, you know, I haven't been on any apps. No, actually, no, I've put women on as well. And I've never seen anything like that before. And I don't know if Dami has. I'm sure we've encountered racism in other ways, or, you know, maybe not racism, but sort of tokenism. But Dami, like, have you seen anything like that at all when you've been dating?
No, not into on the platform itself, no. But
Yeah.
in terms of like to my face, yeah, it's like I guess when it happens, you're just kind of like this massive red flag, but you can see it for the first time and be like, okay, yeah, no, this isn't happening. And you just kind of walk away from it. But in terms of like the actual platform, no.
I'm
And I
truly,
think,
I'm truly
yeah,
amazed by it. Like, I couldn't actually believe that this was kind of like, going back to times where people were trying to get flats and they'd be like, no, no blacks, no, whatever this. Well, I actually can't believe that happened. Like I said,
I feel like it's a lot more common with masculine appearing people in gay male spaces, because I've had it constantly my whole life. Whilst I've been dating, men. I've had friends. I thought maybe I'll go in the bear scene, the gay bear scene. I don't know if you've heard of that subcategory, but because I'm into chunkier dudes, with beards and whatnot. So I went and kind of like hung out in their spaces, and they'd say things like, well, not really attracted to brown, not really attracted to black. More, they're just exclusively attracted to each other. They're twins. They just twin up.
Yeah.
These white boys twin up. That's what they do. You look at these couples, these gay bear couples, and it's like there's a mirror in between them.
Yeah.
In those photos. They just want to date someone that looks just like them, because they just don't have enough kind of like wherewithal up there to really kind of like accommodate the fact that there's someone that you're in a relationship with that might be of a different color, might look a bit different to you, might have different tastes, things like that. There's just something, I feel like there's something lacking in these people. That's what I've realized now. I have something very special to offer. I mean, I did have a boyfriend, a jazz singer, who sang with a lot of black people, but he had the gall to say to me, I love your brown skin.
Oh God.
I'm like, I like guys with brown skin.
Yeah.
And I've been told that I'm sweet like chocolate. Well, there was a song like that. But, I'm not good. I'm human.
Yeah, me and Patrick were on a panel together recently, and we had whole talks about, this kind of like fetishizing your color of your skin. Like I said, I think people probably think that it would change within like the gay community because we're all allies and we're all the same, blah blah blah. But actually,
yeah, that was the one thing I just want to quickly get out there. There is this notion that being gay gives you a free pass to be a fucking be a racist, and that has got to change, because you'll hear people say, "How can they be racist? They're gay."
Yep, that's it. Sorry, Daniel. You agreeing there, Daniel?
Well, not in the heavy way with the racism. I think one example that really struck me was when I was talking to a guy online. This is someone who's been speaking to me for years and trying to get with me for a long time, and we've never met in person, but I kind of feel personally that when someone doesn't really know that much about you and they try to have this really artificial connection where it's almost like you can tell that they want you for maybe being a bit of a trophy as opposed to being an individual, because I mean, the way I can tell is when someone tries to get to know you initially first, do they try to get to know your name? Do they try to get to know your hobbies, your interests, or is it a case of, are you ready to meet? Do you want to come here, X, Y, and Z? And this particular guy, he perceived or portrayed himself as being quite, open to the idea of a relationship. And I didn't really sense that there was a major attraction, but, I let him down gently. And what was interesting was that on Instagram, maybe a couple of days later, I saw him in a picture that he'd posted to his feed, and it was an overhead shot of him laying naked in bed with another black guy, and he used the hashtag like interracial couple in hashtag swirling. So what it really highlighted to me was that
Swirling?
I mean, and the swirling, yeah,
like mixture of black and white.
Yeah, so sorry. So basically, I mean,
oh my God! Right? Can I just say, has anyone heard of Ben Hunt?
No.
He's got an Instagram. He's a BBC correspondent for LGBT's Black, but he's got an Instagram handle called My Swirl Life.
Oh.
I mean, just
swirl was something racial.
No, I mean, just on that though, I mean, what I was saying is that it wasn't really offensive to me that he'd used that term. I think what really got me though was just the notion that instead of him trying to find me as an individual, you know, and trying to see me as the person he wanted to be with. It was almost like he was looking for an archetype, you know, to portray. And I think that that's what really highlighted to me, is that, you know, that fetishization, you know, that's where it kind of made me think, oh, actually, he doesn't really want me. He just wants, you know, he just wants this status of whatever that means to him. So
couple hashtag swirling hashtag.
Yeah. Okay. So can I ask you a question, Daniel? So you did say that you kind of sensed from the beginning when you were chatting to this particular person that connection was somehow artificial. So I'm just wondering, because you are a very clever man. I think for me, it's once I see that, once I just see a sign of that, once you see where that conversation is going, there's no way for me to engage with that person, because it's a waste of time. And I think there is a lot of that on these dating apps. You can chat to someone for days and you can just see that it's just not going somewhere. Do you know what I mean? Does this not frustrate you? Do you know what I mean? Because I think for me, it would just the first sign, I'm gone. I'm just intrigued by how you handle
Dating is an absolute nightmare, really.
I think sometimes you find that for me personally, I've developed a bit of a zero tolerance for certain situations now. So if I'm talking to someone who's maybe approached me or vice versa, and then the conversation ever goes towards the tokenism aspect of things, if I feel that it's a question that's come out of curiosity and it's something that someone's asking because they want to know more about me as an individual and my culture, then I'm open to that. 9 times out of 10, it's not. But there was a situation the other day, actually, and this is going to be quite candid, but I'll share it with you guys because it's an open forum. Again, talking about that whole stereotype of the BBC, Big Black something or other. I'm, not ashamed to say that I don't have, the biggest appendage in that capacity, but I'm quite modest, but I'm quite proud of what I have. But the gay. I didn't say it was short. But then when it came to this situation and exchanging pictures, for example, he said, is it, BBC? And I was like, well, you can see and judge for yourself. I'm not that bothered. I was subsequently blocked after the pictures were sent. And I think I was probably a little bit more upset with myself for actually succumbing to the whole notion of what it was, because I think, again, going back to that whole fetishization, people have an expectation. They want to see what they want to see. And I think when the reality doesn't quite meet the fantasy, then you get discarded quite quickly. And I think that you have to be quite resilient to be able to deal with that. And for me, generally, because I've gone through that so many times, in a way, it was frustrating, but it wasn't surprising. So, but because I'd already
though, that we, as people of color, we expect these kind of interactions and situations. We're just like, oh well, it's not surprising. That's truly really sad that we as human beings just kind of expect to be pushed aside and tokenized, and that we're just not surprised by it. Whereas you tell the story to somebody else who maybe isn't a person of color, they'd be like, oh my god, that never happens to me. But we're just like, meh, next.
Yeah, but that is really, you become numb, and I don't think that's healthy. I don't know. I feel that it happens, and then we accept, and then we obviously we're humans, we're not machines, and you kind of allow it to keep going. And I think, there are proven, information out there that shows that it really does affect our mental health as well. So, and yeah, but I think, Daniel, you're definitely such a resilient guy.
Yeah.
I can't. I just couldn't.
I want to ask, we're going to close up now, but I just want to ask, before we go, if each person could just sort of give a quick couple of lines about how they feel that as people of color in the queer community, what would you say to people, in how to address us and just talk to us and engage with us? Dami? Or even just, how you feel like the community could change for the better in terms of people of color.
I think it's better. I can't remember where I heard this. I might have heard it today or somewhere else, but being a silent ally is sometimes a good thing. So knowing it is your responsibility to educate yourself and not necessarily putting it on the people who are living this daily experience, because just living that it can be quite tiring, and having to explain to other people why you matter can be quite tiring. So then also having to educate people on top of that can be something that's not really, we didn't create racism, we didn't create homophobia or anything with those. We just wanted to exist unapologetically. So, Google's free, YouTube's free, events like this are free. So it's like very easy to educate yourself. And being an ally and just being a silent ally, so knowing when to pass the mic and being like, okay, I don't know much about this. This isn't my space. This isn't for me to talk over them. This is for them, for us. But when I say them, I mean us, to be able to speak up and speak loudly, because you're right, Chantal, that we're always so muted, and it's more made to believe and internalize that what we have to say and how we exist isn't important. But I would just literally be like, be a silent ally, but also knowing when to use your privilege and to amplify our voices. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Patrick?
Yeah, everything Dami says. I think white people, they just have power to actually make a change. We as Black people, we are just a very minute, very tiny percentage, and we can do our best, but ultimately white people can actually, be the greatest allies for us and just completely change. They have the power. They have the power to change us, and we can just fight by being visible and just being unapologetically visible and doing ourselves, basically.
Thank you. I think I'm going to get a T-shirt that just says that. Unapologetically visible. I like that. Farhan?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could echo what Patrick's saying. We don't necessarily have the kind of the numbers, and we don't necessarily have the reins of power in the LGBTQ movement as it is. But I think that we just need to keep on going and asserting ourselves a lot more. If we, if we don't demand the black and brown stripes and the pride flag, we're not going to get the visibility and the kind of the presence that we deserve.
Okay. Thank you very much. And Daniel?
Oh, it's a tricky one. I'd probably say maybe asking more questions as opposed to making more statements about what we are expected to do, and trying to kind of have an open narrative where people can express their differences without it becoming a bit of a siloed thinking process. Because the whole thing about the diversity aspect is that it's diverse for a reason. There are so many different voices within this sector, and I think it's just trying to allow those different voices to have their way of expressing themselves and giving people the option to feel comfortable, to be comfortable in that space, and knowing that it is ever evolving, ever expanding. So just trying to be open to the potential biases that we might have, and rather than thinking that I'm not going to approach this person because they might be a particular way, just having an open mind and trying to give them the benefit of the doubt before making a judgment, I think is really important. So I would say that that's my final thought.
Thank you. And I would just say for myself that, we can learn a lot about Black history, especially with like Black Lives Matter and things going on now, Black and brown history. But actually there are other factors like us people here who are queer who don't have a voice anyway. We feel like we're marginalized in our own communities, let alone within the wider community. And I think if you can teach yourself about how we actually feel as humans navigating as a brown person through queer spaces and non-queer spaces, when some of us are probably more visibly queer than others, just maybe take the time to understand that we are brown, but we also are more multifaceted, and there are other things about us that we are struggling with every day, and that being queer in this space is particularly very difficult when it comes at us from every angle. So as Dami said, very well, be a silent ally and just let us speak, and don't speak for us, and back us up and believe us, because if we're telling you something's happening, it's happening. We're not looking for attention. We get attention everywhere we go. We don't need your attention. What we actually need is back us up, and don't try and rewrite our narrative and tell us how we feel. And I think that spans just over even being queer, Whether you're a woman, whether you identify as non-binary, don't tell us our experiences, listen to us and educate yourselves. And I just want to say thank you for everyone that came along today. And if each person could just quickly say what your social media handles, if there's any way that we can get in contact with you, and if quickly, if you could just give that, Patrick first.
Yeah, so I have a few. My Facebook is Patrick Ziza, just easy, just type that in. I've got Instagram, which is Patrick Dance, I think. Patrick Ziza Dance, yeah, that's the one. And then I've got another one, which is Dandism Dance Theatre, and my website is there as well. And also, last one is I'm a member of House of Finesse. That's my house here in Newcastle, or a house I'm a member of. So it's House of Finesse. So follow all of those. Thank you.
And Dammy?
My Instagram is @Journals of Dammy, and my photography Instagram is Visuals by JOD. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Thank you. And Daniel?
You can find me on Instagram @KingUendo, and I also have a very, very small YouTube channel. My profile name is Mr. Clever D.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And Farhan to end with. Yes, you can catch me on @Feztagram on Instagram or @Queerhan Khan at Twitter. Yeah, but I've also got a little YouTube channel myself, which had thousands of views after I went to the protests in Birmingham. And that's something you can find on my Twitter.
And as well, was it My God, I'm Queer?
That's right. So there's 2 films out right now. One is @LGBT Rainbow Film on Twitter and Instagram. That's Pride and Protest, made by Rainbow Films. And of course, Matt and Naz Foundation has made My God, I'm Queer, which is available on Channel 4.
Amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, myself, I am on various platforms under Sister Shack or Sister_Shack. They're all down there somewhere. You can see it on your screen. And I also have a website, sister-shack.com, which is really hard to say, and I didn't really think about how the sounds when I made Sister Shack, but yes, sister-shack.com. And I just want to say thank you very much to Northern Pride as well for setting this up for us. It's been a really good way of getting our message across, and I'm hoping that I haven't come across as too clunky, because this is officially my first ever hosting.
Well done.
Thank you very much. We've also got some other events coming on within Northern Pride. We've got on the 21st, so next Wednesday. Is it next Wednesday? Yeah, next Wednesday. We've got a panel discussion where we're going to go more in depth with talking about Black Lives Matter and from a queer perspective. And next Friday with Patrick, there's a Q&A, and we'll also be seeing, was it your dance film?
Yeah, so you'll be seeing one of my work.
And how do you pronounce that? Yegoko?
Yegoko, yeah.
Yegoko, okay.
Yeah.
That was next Friday, the 23rd, with Patrick, and before that on the Wednesday, the 21st. And I think there was some information as well about artist takeovers along the screen somewhere. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone. And it's been really lovely to see you all and meet some of you before. And I haven't met some of you before, sorry, but to meet you for the first time, and hopefully we'll get to meet again soon. But, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.